Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Mitzi Smith, and I am the J. Davison Phillips Professor of New Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary and a member of the SBL Committee for Underrepresented Minorities in the Profession. My colleague is...
Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Jean-Pierre Ruiz. I'm Associate Professor of Biblical Studies in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at St. John's University in New York City, where I'm also a Senior Research Fellow of the university's Vincentian Center for Church and Society. I'm also pleased and proud to be a member of the SBL's Committee on Underrepresented Racial and Ethnic Minorities in the Profession, and we're glad that all of you can join us today.
Yes, this event is for Black students and students of color who are considering or might consider pursuing a PhD in biblical studies. In this space, minoritized biblical scholars and a PhD student will share their stories and journeys to assist you as you consider and/or prepare for a possible vocation or career as a biblical scholar. Our panelists will discuss why one should pursue a PhD in Bible, how to position oneself for it, available support structures, and some vocational or career paths in the changing landscape of theological education. We'd like to thank the Society of Biblical Literature and the Forum for Theological Exploration for sponsoring this event. And we are grateful for the rest of the members of the SBL Current, including our chairperson, Dr. Raj Nandala.
Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, let me remind you that once each of our panelists has spoken, they'll be speaking for 6 to 8 minutes. They will be happy to field questions. We'd ask you to please type your questions into the Q&A area, and Dr. Smith and I will curate those questions and direct them to the panelists. If you have a question for a particular panelist, please indicate that as you type your question. And now to our panel. Dr. Valerie Bridgman is Dean and Vice President of Academic Affairs and Associate Professor of Homiletics and Hebrew Bible at Methodist Theological School in Ohio. Dr. Bridgman earned her PhD from Baylor University. Dr. Jacqueline Hidalgo is Associate Dean for Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Professor of Latino Studies and Religion at Williams College. Dr. Hidalgo earned the doctorate from Claremont Graduate University. Dr. Jennifer Kaland is Assistant Professor of Religious Studies at Iona College and earned the PhD from Drew University. Dr. Uriah Kim is President and John Dillenberger Professor of Biblical Studies at the Graduate Theological Union, and he earned the PhD at the Graduate Theological Union. Dr. Luis Menendez Antuña is Assistant Professor of New Testament at Boston University School of Theology, and he earned the PhD at Vanderbilt University. The Reverend Jeremy Williams is a PhD candidate at Harvard University. Our thanks to the members of this distinguished panel. We're eager to hear what you have to share with us this afternoon. Dr. Bridgman.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to Corinth and to SBL for hosting us. I understand that the Forum for Theological Exploration is a co-convener as well. So my thanks to them. I'm going to spend my 6 to 8 minutes telling a story, and if it provokes questions for you, then so be it. Why a PhD? So I want to start with my beginnings. I grew up in a Bible-curious home, the daughter of a holiness preacher of the Church of God Anderson and a school teacher who was of the National Baptist Convention, who was also a vacation Bible school teacher. So when I say I grew up in a Bible-curious home, I really mean I learned to ask questions about and for the Bible very early. And then I received a call to ministry at a very early age. I was 18, licensed by the Church of God and ordained before I was 26. In the Church of God, I didn't need a Master's of Divinity. So I ran toward my first calling, which was to be a reporter. And while I was reporting, I felt this deep urge to do something different. And the pastor of the Presbyterian Church in downtown San Antonio drove me toward my Master's of Divinity at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, where I fell in love with the languages. And so if I were to tell anybody what you need most of all, if you're planning on doing a PhD in biblical studies, is a love for the languages. I became one of the Hebrew tutors for my entire time while I was at APTS. And while I was there, both of my biblical Hebrew Bible scholar teachers, Dr. Andy Dearman and Dr. Prescott Williams Jr., may he rest in peace, pushed me toward a PhD. I didn't know I was interested in a PhD in biblical studies. I just knew I loved the languages and I was curious about everything I studied. And they both invited me to, particularly Dr. Dearman, to go to Baylor, which was just 90 miles up the street, and ask questions about whether I could get into the program there. I did get into the program, and I did pursue the PhD there in biblical studies. I was fortunate enough to have Dr. Bellinger and Dr. Kennedy not dissuade me from my interest in womanist biblical studies in the early 1990s. And they knew nothing about it, but they were interested in my interests. And so they would help me look for scholars. What they didn't do is let me hire, and I do mean hire, Dr. Renita Weems as an extra biblical scholar beyond the school. But they were interested in my interests, and I'm thankful for that. I was interrupted in my studies for actually 3 years because of medical things. So I would say to you, be ready for interruptions. I had illnesses, I had some family things that happened, and I took on too much outside of my PhD. I was working and pastoring at the same time. If I had to give anybody any advice, I would say, don't do that. What I would do differently beside that is I would get an MA in biblical studies to prepare better. Although I felt deeply prepared with an MDiv, I really think an MA or MA in biblical studies would have helped me more. I would have looked for more resources. I did get the FTE for my PhD, and I did get the degree. The university gave me resources, but I think part of my working more was feeling like I needed to support my family more. I would do something differently. I would have practiced teaching more before I graduated. What do you need to consider about whether you are a PhD student? Here's some questions. Do you like rabbit holes? Do you actually like research? Do you know how to say no? You got to say no to say yes to a PhD. There's some things you need to say no to. Do you know how to enlist help and to ask for it? Is there someone you really want to study or study with? Have you read their work? Have you followed their blog beyond fangirling or fanboying? Have you counted the physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, and familiar cost? Is this the time for you to do the PhD? For me, these are the kinds of questions you need to ask yourself. I know that people say that this is a hard time to be doing a PhD in biblical studies, but if this is your passion, there are many things that you might do with a PhD, and we can talk about that later. They aren't all related to teaching, but do you like teaching? Do you like people? Do you like questions? Those are all the kinds of questions I think you need to be asking yourself right now as you consider whether or not God is calling you, whether or not you feel called to, whether or not you feel the passion for a PhD. That's my first volley. I'm looking forward to what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgman. Dr. Hidalgo.
Hi, good afternoon. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Bridgman. That was really wonderful. Thank you for sharing both your stories and the advice. And thank you to SBL and Current for this invitation and the opportunity to speak to you today. I want to be supportive, but I also want to be forthright. So today I want to touch briefly on 4 things. Why you might not want to get a PhD in humanities at all, why you might not want to get a PhD in biblical studies specifically, why I would still selfishly like for you to get a PhD in biblical studies, and a few strategies that helped me survive doctoral study and tenure. First, 2 caveats. My position is split between Latinx studies and religion, and that is an unusual post for someone trained in biblical studies, so my perspective on the field is definitely eccentric. Second, everyone on this panel and many others have much more than 5 minutes of thoughts on this topic, so please reach out and look for those stories. If you're interested, I've written more extensively on Latina journeys in biblical studies in the edited volume, Women in the Society of Biblical Literature. So first, why you might not want to get a PhD in the humanities. I think Dr. Bridgman covered a lot of this. No challenge is insurmountable, but I wish I had been more realistic and answered some of the questions Dr. Bridgman posed. Doctoral study is a huge financial risk, even when you're lucky enough to get good fellowships for graduate study and a good job afterwards. And the reality is most PhDs in humanities will never hold a tenure track professorial position. That model of scarcity also deeply shapes the psychological and geographic challenges of graduate study and professorial work. And I was incredibly lucky in graduate school and with my job, but even that luck had costs. And for instance, as I was joking before, I now live in a remote, overwhelmingly white town. And I don't just mean white people, I mean winter has already arrived and there was snow on the ground. I'm a city person who loathes winter, so that's a cost for me. Okay, 2, why you might not want to get a PhD in biblical studies. Biblical studies is also an overwhelmingly white and male field. 2018 membership in SBL was nearly 86% white, and only about 25% of SBL members identify as women. Obviously, some white scholars can still be good mentors and friends, but few schools employ a faculty member of color who can serve as a mentor. And there are many times when a minoritized woman will be the only woman or the only person of color, or almost certainly the only woman of color in a classroom or at an event. And we can certainly say more about the psychological toll of that later. Biblical studies is also a field with key epistemological problems. And these problems make it difficult for students from diverse backgrounds to access these programs of study. Now, one, Dr. Bridgman pointed to, many doctoral programs emphasize proficiency in specific ancient languages. And expecting that proficiency before entry really delimits who can apply. You either have to know you want to study this topic as an undergraduate, or like me, you have to go to a master's program where you spend almost all of your time studying languages. And even if you can get admitted to doctoral programs, the highly uneven power dynamics of graduate study and the forms of biblical criticism practiced at too many institutions are problematic. And there are many sources on this issue, but please watch videos from this past August Black Scholars Matter SBL Symposium for more information. Okay, why I still selfishly want you to study biblical studies. If you're here, you already know the kind of social power that continues to envelop the Bible. Absolutely nothing about biblical studies and all the ways people engage the Bible beyond the academy changes unless more people from different backgrounds with new questions get PhDs and transform the landscape of biblical interpretation. The people speaking to you today are evidence that some transformation has been happening, even if slowly and unevenly. Biblical texts and the study of scriptures more broadly can provide a uniquely shared space for conversation across difference. As Fernando F. Segovia charged in his SBL presidential address, we need a global systemic criticism for critical times. And that is only possible if we can build spaces where many different critics from many different contexts and perspectives come together. The polarized political climate of the US right now has underscored for me how much we need people capable of that work now. The most creative undergraduate students I have taught almost never go to graduate school in biblical studies. If they pursue doctoral work, they prefer ethnic studies, truly interdisciplinary fields that challenge dominant epistemologies rather than force students to replicate them. Now, I love ethnic studies, but I want to make the case that some forms of biblical studies can enable even more radical possibilities for working collaboratively beyond normative borders, for asking questions and developing ideas across boundaries of time, space, and perspective. But we need more people doing it for that to be more common. Some strategies for survival. Many of us struggle with imposter syndrome. Lena Palacios argues we should see ourselves as infiltrators instead. So I try to remind myself that I am here to infiltrate, to build alliances with other infiltrators, and to support others in transforming the academy. That has been one secret of survival for me. Remember that even if you're isolated at your institution, you're not alone in the academy. There are other infiltrators already doing this work, and I would have never made it without them or a strong non-academic family and community. But I also made it because in the USA, we have programs like the Forum for Theological Exploration that co-sponsored this event and the Hispanic Theological Initiative. Thanks to HTI, Jean-Pierre, who introduced us, has long served as a mentor for me. And thanks to these programs, I met other colleagues in theology and religious studies more broadly who kept me sane and who have helped me to broaden my intellectual work. I also joined the Committee on Underrepresented Racial Ethnic Minorities in the Profession for their luncheon every year at the annual meeting of the Society of Biblical Literature. And there I have met so many people, including almost all the people on this panel before. And they've been wonderful allies and collaborators in working to make this academy a better place. I know that we and so many others are eager to help you navigate the academy too. So thank you for your time and good luck.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hidalgo, for your challenges and for your reflections. Next up is Dr. Jennifer Kaland.
Good afternoon. First, I want to say thank you for this opportunity to share my story with you all. When I entered graduate school, I thought I was unique, and not in the good way. See, I had an undergraduate degree in chemistry and I had a master's in healthcare administration. At that point, I had been working in the healthcare industry for about 5 or 7 years. And I share this because it explains my relationship to the humanities. If ever there was a windy and unlikely path, the road less traveled, I was certain that I was on it. But after some soul searching, and still while working, I took a class, a graduate class. It was Pauline's literature. I was in a class with mostly seminarians at a Catholic institution. And though in some ways my very presence screamed outsider, I felt very much at home. Having to choose a concentration in my master's program is what led me to biblical studies. I remember being strongly encouraged to consider ethics. And while I was interested in those questions, I was clear that I wanted to study the biblical text. Like Dr. Bridgman, I am the daughter of a Baptist preacher, and the Bible has always been an important book in my life. So despite my insecurities, from what I thought was being really an outsider, non-traditional student, what I found on my journey in my moments of discernment was clarity about why I wanted to be there and what I wanted to do in graduate school. I had questions and concerns, and frankly, I had hopes that this text, the biblical text, could bring about some sort of healing for people, for our nation, for the world. I had no desire to proclaim the text, but I did want to study and teach it. And so I want to offer you 3 considerations as you discern if a PhD in Bible is for you. 1, there are many paths to the same destination. Some may be more direct and easier to navigate, but these paths will all still get you there. Don't be discouraged if it takes you a little longer. Number 2, there must be a commitment to the craft. And you've heard this already. And I think that commitment can manifest itself in numerous ways, but there are 2 that I offer up for consideration. And one is the languages. You have to learn and study ancient languages. I recall a conversation I had over dinner with a political scientist who was studying at Union Theological Seminary at the time. And she said, each discipline has a language in which you must be proficient. For political science, it's statistics. For biblical studies, it's Hebrew and Greek. And so that perspective helped me get past my anxieties. The second thing that I think a commitment to the craft, a commitment to the craft can be demonstrated is through methodology. There are several approaches to biblical interpretation, and you should know these various methods. You don't have to agree with all the approaches to the text, but you should understand them and acknowledge them. And I think that's an important part of being a biblical scholar. Knowing that your way of reading the text is not the only way to read the text. And finally, there is not a one-size-fits-all model to what a biblical scholar looks like. Look at our distinguished panel today. We all have different faith commitments, if any at all. We have different relationships to the text, if any at all. And this is the kind of diversity that excites and challenges me. Be clear. Different programs will train you differently. So you must be honest with yourself about your fit for a particular program. Ask yourself, will this program allow me to do what I want to do? Will it stifle my curiosities, or will it stretch and challenge me? What I have found to be valuable as a scholar is having support systems. My family and my friends, my sisters, my mom, my partner and kids, they're my cheerleaders. But they're also my constant reminder of a life that is beyond this academy. I encourage you to find a community of scholars who will support you and your work. I found this at the Womanist Gathering at SBL and AAR. I found this at the Forum for Theological Exploration and at the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning. These communities at various points in my career have been like fresh wind and fresh fire. At my first SBL meeting as a graduate student, it was a Black woman scholar who took me by the hand and walked me through several of those Saturday night receptions. This taught me a great deal about learning how to network at these functions. It was at an FTE gathering when I was struggling to articulate what I wanted to do and the work that I wanted to do. It was mentors there. Dr. Bridgman was one of those who poured into me holistically, mind, body, and soul. It was in that place that I first felt affirmed as a scholar. And more recently at Wabash, as a junior scholar, I found community that invigorated my work, that shaped my perspective on my role in the academy, and I left there with friends and mentors. Dr. Hidalgo is one of those. The relationships that I've developed with some of my friends from graduate school have also persisted. My previous classmates are my writing partners, my sounding boards, part of my kitchen cabinet, and they've become a network of colleagues and friends around the world. These communities continue to sustain me. They are essential for your ability to not only survive, but to thrive in this profession. And I encourage you to find community, to cultivate it, to cherish it. And finally, I think that a doctorate degree equips you with skills that can be used in a variety of ways. Being a professor is but one option. But I also think we need public scholars who have been trained in the biblical text and can contribute to national and international conversations. We need religion writers, and we need people at funding organizations like Lilly and the Ford Foundation who fund shaping these national and international conversations. We need people at think tanks like the Council for Foreign Relations, Religion and Foreign Policy Center. the public sector, the private sector, publishing houses, NGOs. All of these organizations can benefit from these skill sets. From my days in industry, I think it's helpful for us to think of these skills as tools in your toolbox, right? You have research skills, language proficiencies, teaching, leadership, effective communication. All of these skills are transferable. You can take them from the classroom to the boardroom to the conference room. We need to think more expansively about the role of religion in the world. And I think this will enable us to think more broadly about career opportunities for PhDs. At a time where we're imagining ways of being in the world and ways of continuing in higher education, we can also creatively reimagine this discipline. And with that, I wish you all the very best on your journeys.
Jean-Pierre, I believe you're muted.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kaland, for your reflections about your journey. Dr. Kim.
Thank you so much. You're going to notice that my rhetorical strategy is very similar to that of Dr. Jackie Hidalgo. I don't know when this happened, but at some point, probably in the last 10 years or so, the return on investment became a very popular metric for measuring the value of college education and ranking of colleges and majors. So if you use or care about this metric to measure the return on investment for a PhD program in Bible, then this may not be a path for you. Now think about it, investing around 5 to 7 years of your life, engaging in a full-time study while losing an opportunity to earn a full-time income. And then if you are fortunate to get a full-time academic position upon completion, you will earn somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 per year in your first 5 to 7 years. And then at most, around $100,000 to $150,000 in your career. That would be the highest pay that you're gonna get in your career. In contrast, college graduate in their early 20s, right out of college without any further study, could earn such a salary, $50,000 to $80,000. And someone out of a law school could earn over $100,000 in their first job. For the PhD in Bible to make any sense, we need to measure the ROI using a different set of metrics. Rather than the income you can make, we need to measure the impact you can make on others, on yourself, and on your vocation, calling in life. Now, why PhD? I'm adopting a script that I read at the commencement, sort of as a charge to the newly minted PhDs. So at the end of a doctoral program, you would have received education and training that would prepare you to serve religious communities, the academy, and the society by bringing to bear your critical acumen and scholarly inquiry on issues facing religion and society. In theological terms, you are called to be a prophet, courageous critic and speaker of truth, a rabbi, scholar and transmitter of sacred traditions, and a hermeneut, interpreter and reappropriator of the heritage in changing times. Now, after hearing this, if it makes you excited, oh my gosh, prophet, a rabbi, and a hermeneut, if that really excites you, then yes, you should really consider this path. But after hearing that script, boring, what's a big deal? Then I don't know, you might have to think about it, whether this is the right path for you. Now, for me, after earning my PhD, I think I gained following, 4 things. Number one, I became an independent thinker, scholar, teacher, and preacher. And you have no idea how big of a deal this is. Having my own expert opinion on the Bible, the content, context, and the politics of it all, rather than repeating or relying on other people's opinion or study. I could disagree with some, including the people in position of power and authority, or I could agree with some, including the people who have little voice or power. That is, I can make up my own mind based on my own study, knowledge, and experience. Having a PhD after my name gave me that confidence and credential to be an independent thinker. Second, I am in position now to make greater influence and impact on others than before I received a PhD. There's a scholar named Joel Green, a notable scholar. When he was contemplating doing a PhD, like most of us, we had to deal with the funding issue, right? And so he came up with this plan. He wrote a letter to a lot of people and said, please invest in my desire to do a PhD. And he made a case as to why it was worth making investment, right? Why funding or supporting his study to the PhD made sense. And I don't think his calculation is scientific, but I think he makes this point, and that is, when you earn a PhD, there's a chance of being a professor, faculty, with a career of about 30 years. And let's say you teach about X number of students per year, you multiply that by 30 years. Then let's imagine that out of those students, let's say some percentage of those students end up serving in congregations and nonprofits and so on and so on. So after calculating all of that, he said one PhD person could influence over 1.3 million individuals. Now, again, as I said, I'm not sure whether that's scientific or not, but because it is difficult to measure, how much influence or impact you have on others. But I'm convinced that people actually listen to me more carefully and give greater weight to my opinion than before I earned my PhD, except for my wife. But everybody else really it gives greater weight, and I think I have a greater influence. Then number three, with a PhD, comes great responsibility. And I'm borrowing from Spider-Man's quote there. We have this greater responsibility to defend the integrity of the Bible against those who exploit the Bible for their personal agenda. I don't have to tell you that there are just too many people out there who interpret, utilize the Bible for their own purpose and gain. And I think one of our greatest responsibility as a PhD in the Bible is to help people to become informed and responsible interpreters of the Bible. There's too many people who are irresponsible in the way they read and interpret the Bible. Fourth, after going through a program, PhD program, I gained a whole new world of enjoyment and pleasure. Finding joy from reading very dense and technical writing related to the Bible, that's a very small percentage of people in the world. But again, for us, there's a pleasure in that. Most people find them to be impenetrable and boring, but not people with a PhD in Bible. And experiencing the spiritual high from reading this kind of material and hearing thoughts from a great minds in our field, again, I consider that one of the greatest blessings that I have, received in my life. So 8 minutes is up already, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Now we'd like to hear from Dr. Menendez Antuña.
Hi, everyone. So let me start by expressing my gratitude to the committee for putting together this panel, but also express my gratitude to Professors Ragnadella, Mitzi Smith, and Jean-Pierre Ruiz for doing this work. I'm deeply humbled to be part of the panel with colleagues and friends. And as I'm listening to you this afternoon, it feels like coming home again. The title of my presentation, not that they had to have a title, but I thought it was catchy, and it will. My presentation will unpack what I mean by this. The title is "Don't Do It, but if you must, do it with us." So it pains me to start with the bad news. To answer the question that brings us here today, don't do it. Just don't. Pursuing a PhD in biblical studies means embarking on a journey where the odds of succeeding are stacked against us. PhD granting institutions should be blunt about this renewed reality. Jobs have been declining. The contraction of the job market means that every position is sought after, not only by newly minted PhDs, but by candidates who have been years in temporary positions. Any new opening receives hundreds of applicants. The competition is steep and the minimum requirements have expanded. It is not uncommon that many candidates with published monographs, peer-reviewed articles, excellent teaching reviews, and reputable grants cannot find placement. It is essential to deconstruct the idea that if you excel, you will find a job. There aren't just enough jobs. Furthermore, getting a job, most likely, as many of the colleagues here have shared, will means that you have to relocate to a part of the country you haven't considered before. I'm teaching biblical studies 5,000 miles away from my hometown, with a very heavy teaching load, underpaid, as Oraya has recently mentioned, and with little to no time to pursue your own research agenda. So the first part of the advice is don't do it. You might think that such advice comes from a bitter academic that have seen his dreams crushed. Nothing further from the truth. As someone who wakes up every day grateful for the opportunity to live out my deepest vocation and my dreams, to conduct research, teach, and service in areas that I'm passionate about, and for an institution that I deeply love, it pains me to confirm this news. As someone who believes that our field suffers from a serious crisis of imagination, it pains me to tell prospective students, particularly those of you interested in dreaming of new ways of doing biblical studies, that the odds are stacked against us. Such doom and gloom, I would like to add, only applies if we conceive of the job market in a traditional sense. That is, getting an academic position after getting a doctorate. But outside academia, there are many promising opportunities opening up. And despite moments of despair and despite the state of our field, I'm hopeful that the winds are changing. Initiatives like Black Scholars Matters or this one are just a sneak peek into a future that might be bright in the future. Jennifer Calhoun, Professor Calhoun has mentioned many other venues that I completely agree with, and there are great opportunities to come out after a PhD in biblical studies. But I'm also aware that asking someone not to live out their deepest vocation is not fair. And for that reason, I'm going to specify that my first piece of advice comes with a qualification. Don't do it, but if you must, do it with us. I will be missing the mark if I spend this time discussing or dissuading you from pursuing the academic path. Let me then specify what I mean by us. I came to the United States 12 years ago to pursue a New Testament at Vanderbilt. At the time, I did everything right. I got in the right program, right fit. I had the most wonderful advisor, Professor Fernando Segovia. My institution was supportive, both financially and logistically. And despite such favorable circumstances, I was on the brink of quitting. Despite what academia tells us, getting to the finish line is not about intelligence or even perseverance. It's about creating a world around you that will support you in your darkest moments. What kept me from quitting? My mentors looked me right in the eye and said, "You're going to finish no matter what, and we're going to do everything within our power to support you." Only one question saved me at the time. "Luis, what do you need? Say it and we will make it happen." Thank you, Hispanic Theological Initiative. When I say do it with us, I am referring to a community that will support you unconditionally. So here is my second piece of advice. If you can't live without pursuing a PhD, create a world around you that will sustain you unconditionally in your darkest moments. Create a world around you that will nurture your vocation, and then when the lights of your vocation dim, someone will light candles all around you. Let me briefly explore two metaphors that illuminate what living in such a world might look like. I call it a world of roads and singers. First the roads, then the singers. So in creating this world around you, you will have to drive through multiple roads. Here the metaphor is pretty cliche. The roads you decide to take are essential to your success. Are you going to choose a bumpy road, or are you going to try to get onto the highway? Let me be candid about what a highway looks like in a PhD. A fully funded program where your tuition remission and a stipend will allow you to focus on your research for at least 5 years. Mentors and institutions with a proven record of working with minority students and invested in minoritized approaches. Invested in you, available, kind, and candid. Only mentors who have traveled the road of being a minority will fully understand what you are experiencing. C, a healthy disposition, humility, and wisdom to know where to speed up and when to stop and rest. Now the singers. Although cars, roads, and dispositions are important, the key element is the why. What is your vocation? Why do you want to teach your destination? Why do you want to reach your destination? And what are you going to do once you get there? Here, only you can provide the right answer. Let me share briefly with you a poem that talks about the role of the singer and the songwriter. A song initially composed by Horacio Guarani and made famous by Mercedes Sosa, who has been singing with me since I started a PhD program. Christopher, if you don't mind sharing the song. I'm gonna read it in Spanish, but the translation is next to it. Si se calla el cantor, calla la vida, porque la vida misma es todo un canto. Si se calla el cantor, muere de espanto la esperanza, la luz y la alegría. Si se calla el cantor, se quedan solos los humildes gorriones de los diarios. Los obreros del puerto se persignan. ¿Quién habrá de luchar por su salario? Thank you. You can stop sharing. As someone who spent many years as a community organizer and who was theologically trained and spiritually changed by Latin American liberation theology, I decided to pursue a PhD in biblical studies because I wanted to reconcile my political, religious, and ethical commitments with my intellectual inclinations. In other words, I see the intellectual task as a way of activism and vice versa. Very much in line with Edward Said's vision for the intellectual as someone who speaks truth to power, Guarani and Sosa in this song have always inspired me to conceive of the task of the biblical critic as a singer that interprets a hymn for the sake of liberation. On these matters, I'm no role model, but on these matters, my vocation still fuels me. And that's my final piece of advice. Only your vocation and your passion will get you to the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Menendez Antuña. Our next speaker is the Reverend Jeremy Williams.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sure I'm not on mute. I'm Jeremy Williams, and I'm grateful for QREMP and the Forum for Theological Exploration that has had a special role in my life, even since I was an undergraduate. I'm doubly honored to be on this panel with these esteemed scholars, especially as only a PhD candidate. I hope I don't embarrass myself. I study the New Testament and early Christianity, and in my research, I'm involved studying trial scenes in the Acts of the Apostles and the function of criminal law in the Roman Empire. I also interrogate how both ancient and modern historians craft narratives to racialize, criminalize, and victimize individuals and groups of people. And so in the field of biblical studies, I'm joining a proportionally small number of African Americans who research in this field academically, as this panel has indicated. So therefore, part of the reason that I believe this panel is so important is because good representation matters. In my own experience, I know personally the positive effect of having role models that look like me. 3 quick examples should suffice. Bishop Joseph A. Johnson was the first African-American student to attend Vanderbilt University, my alma mater, and there he received a PhD in New Testament, and the Black Cultural Center there is named after him. While I was at Vanderbilt, I encountered Dr. Brad Braxton, a renowned New Testament scholar with whom I was able to also study with at Harvard during graduate school. And I was able to observe how he brings his full self into the classroom. And while studying at Yale, I was assigned my first pastoral assignment by Bishop Thomas L. Hoyt Jr., who is also a New Testament scholar. I cannot underestimate how seeing those people who look like me set me on the trajectory that I'm currently on. Now, as has been mentioned before, some of the largest and most notorious hurdles for entering this field are the language requirements. And although they sometimes appear more like a task than a tool, facility in ancient languages grants access to more directly engage with both primary text and material culture. So I would encourage you, as you're seeking this, to be intentional, to study and enjoy, as Dr. Bridgman and Dr. Kim noted, these languages, and do it as early as possible, even if it requires some summer sessions. Now, the ability to read closely in this way allows for us to find clues for how ancient Greek, Roman, Jewish, Egyptian, and Ethiopian bodies navigated their worlds. It also allows for us to excavate previously ignored and overlooked paths for interpreting texts and constructing ancient worlds. And reconstructing ancient worlds is not only about the languages. Those worlds cannot be reconstituted apart from modern theoretical approaches, as Dr. Kalin noted. The historical critical method, which occupies a hegemonic position in our discipline, has to be interrogated for its blind spots in its positivistic search for what actually happened. Historical critical approaches are useful for some aspects of biblical criticism, including issues of dating text and tracking differences in various manuscripts. However, in many ways, historical criticism, as Dr. Hidalgo noted, perpetuates kyriarchy, racism, and xenophobia. And this is primarily rooted in the hermeneutic principle that feminists and womanists have clearly articulated, that what you see in a text depends on where you sit. Hence, we need for more folks from the seat of those who have been minoritized, colonized, dehumanized, and criminalized, even if the odds are stacked against us, as Dr. Menendez Antuña has noted. In my own experience, my gaze on the ancient world as a Black thinker often raises significantly different questions about Mediterranean antiquity than my colleagues. So I seek to retell history constructively. So in my work, I combine African-American and womanist biblical interpretation strategies with Black feminist, critical race, and post-colonial theoretical approaches to studying the Bible and to work as a historian of Mediterranean antiquity. So I believe that it's important to do this work because expanding the theoretical frames used for analyzing ancient texts exposes how contemporary structures are linked with, disjointed from, and also bear some similarities to those of antiquity. So reading with attention to the experience of Black and minoritized people provides tools for constructing an antiquity that does not legitimize the technologies of exploitation and oppression that persist today. Hence why it's important for Black and other minoritized scholars to enter into the fray of interpretation so that other voices are represented in scholarship, both to advance the discourse and to give students the ability to academically cite our experiences. So I'm honored to join this noble tradition of more fully telling the biblical story of antiquity, following so many who have inspired me either directly or from afar, like those mentioned before, and like even those on this panel, including Dr. Bridgman and Dr. Smith, just to name a few. And I'm also grateful to my advisor, Laura Nasrallah, who welcomes and encourages me to participate in that tradition. See, this highlights another important aspect for future Bible PhD candidates to consider when applying to programs. I would urge you to make sure that your program allows for you to be methodologically and theoretically diverse, because the more of yourself you bring to your work, the more successful you will be. And as a burgeoning Bible scholar, I attempt to bring my whole self into the work, and I encourage others to do the same. I'm certainly interested in research, but I'm even more interested in people. For me, becoming a Bible scholar is to participate in the sacred work of people formation. It is sacred because we are assisting people in learning their language to talk about God. Whether it is as a seminary professor, undergraduate lecturer, church pastor, community center leader, or Facebook public intellectual, we have the opportunity to help people to think through the world. We can push them to more fully exhibit love, more clearly understand justice, more humanly show compassion, and more actively pursue truth, while we learn to do the same thing ourselves. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Reverend Williams. Thanks to all our panelists for their insights, for their challenges, for the words of encouragement that they've offered us, for pathways and for signaling obstacles and how to surmount those obstacles. Now comes the really fun part. Now we'd like to invite the panelists to address some of the questions that have been raised. We invite you to continue posting questions in the Q&A area, and Dr. Smith and I will curate those questions and direct them to the members of our distinguished panel. Dr. Smith.
Yeah, so we want to, excuse me, we want to start with the first comment or question that we received from a Native American, Native Indian brother attendee in our audience. Jeremy said it matters, which is so true. It matters to see people who look like you. And I'd say that, let me apologize first. I'm going to speak for the whole community, the whole committee at this point, and say that we do have to be intentional in thinking about who are the minorities, quote unquote, the minoritized among the minoritized often, who we don't see often. And that would be, one of the cases would be our Native American brothers and sisters. I do know of, I went to school with one, I think the first Native American young lady to graduate in New Testament from Harvard. She's Dr. Justine, was Justine Smith then, I believe Justine Smith Wilson, I think her name is now, and was in contact with her a few months ago. She is now an independent scholar. And I have to confess, I'm not that familiar with other Native American biblical scholars in the field. I understand there may be a couple more, but I think we need to be more intentional in supporting those among us who are often not seen and voices not heard. And the what is stated also is that often the Academy likes talking for Native Americans. And I think many of us have experienced that too, talking for us instead of doing what it takes to increase our numbers so that we can speak for ourselves. And I'd like to invite any of you on the panel to speak to that as well.
Well, let me say, as a dean who often it will have to make decisions about who will inhabit positions, that we don't often know what we don't know. And so we reach out to our colleagues across disciplines and across institutions for ideas and for names and for who's in the pipeline. I will say I looked at HTI and FTE particularly, but other places, Panam, other places where I know there are people who will know scholars I don't know. At Louisville Institute, for example. So we don't often know what we don't know. I remember when I was asked to apply at a particular institution for a particular position. I won't call the institution's name. And one of the older scholars, who happened to be a white male scholar, said, "Oh, there are no minority biblical scholars." But he was talking to me. And at that point, I had been in the field for 5 years. And he said, "When do you finish your degree?" I had already finished. So it's important to have people of color in administration as well. So that's my answer to our friend's question, which is, if there are no people in administration, and if there are no faces like these in this panel, then that will continue to be a problem. I'm always interested to know who's in the pipeline and how they're in the pipeline and who's mentoring them. And so I don't know if that answers, but that's a piece of the puzzle, is what I'm saying.
And I'm not sure whether this is directly related to this discussion.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dr. Kim. I was talking and I was muted while talking. Sorry, but I'd like to just respond very quickly, Dr. Bridgman. That's a great point, because even with SBL Corrupt Committee, we don't. I believe the organization at large chooses, or somebody nominates people for the committee, and so whoever these people are need to consider that our committees are more representative of not just the dominant or even the more dominant minorities, right? But of other groups as well, like Native Americans. Dr. Kim, sorry.
Yeah. So I don't know whether my comment is directly related to this discussion, but I think in some way it does. In that, in the bottom line, there's just not enough individuals in each category, right? So in my community, whenever we try to form, committees, and you hear this all the time, where you have, one or two minoritized individual of one kind, you get put into multiple committees. Whenever they set up a committee, and they are trying their best, right, to have representation from different groups, and one or two individual gets put into like a lot more committees than, let's say, white individuals, right? And I think the bottom line is just there's not enough of us in the field, in the institution, and so on.
let me, from the questions, there's one question directed specifically to Dr. Hidalgo that follows up on part of her presentation. And the question is this: what signs should people look for in a program and school that foster an infiltrator community versus an imposter community? Dr. Hidalgo.
Thank you. And I think that this is a question that other colleagues can speak to. And I think it relates to a few other questions that I saw in the chat in different ways. So, part of it, I think, is something that Luis already described, which is try to look for programs with a proven track record already of supporting minoritized students. And I think that that's part of it. And one of the things that I did myself, although I wasn't, I wish I'd been smarter, but looking at, where are the people I'm reading at, and who, if they were young enough, who advised them, or where did they study? It can be a starting point. And I think someone asked also if we're available to talk. And I think everyone on this panel would say, yes, we're available. You can reach out and ask us questions. We were specifically told not to plug any direct programs. And so I won't do that. I can say that, the program I went to doesn't really exist the way it did when I was there. So don't use my PhD as the necessary way to go. So as a negative, maybe I'll say that. But what I will say is that you should try to find faculties that have some different metrics of diversity, like really physically represented, because whatever they may say they're doing, if their faculties don't look diverse, that demonstrates a certain kind of commitment, no matter what they say they do. The other thing I would say is, are they giving messaging, as Reverend Williams pointed to, are they giving messaging that suggests an openness to interdisciplinary work, an openness to conversation between and among different methodologies within biblical studies? As Dr. Kaland outlined, do they take seriously that it is okay to have different approaches to how one studies the Bible, and that you should know different approaches, even if you end up specializing in one or the other? And so try to look for programs that intentionally foster that. And then I'd say you also really want to talk to the students who are already there. See if there are students there who are also FTE or HTI scholars if you're in the United States, because that can provide you another network to talk to and ask questions of. And someone did ask a chat about folks, about being from a more liminal background. If you fall out, if you come from multiple ethnic backgrounds, or you fall outside of kind of narrow definition of one, this is a moment where I'd say that most of the programs like FTE and HTI that I named, they are open to people with multiple ethnic heritages in certain ways, as long as you meet certain other qualifications. There are loads of us who come from multi-ethnic backgrounds in the field. And one of the things that I do think biblical studies can have as an edge is that it's not so much that you're forced to choose one identity that you always identify with. It's more about minoritized criticism is often turning toward or asking people to just grapple in many complex ways with the places from which they read, and the peoples with whom they read, and the reasons they read. And so I think finding a space that allows you to grapple with that, seeing a program that seems to be fostering those kinds of spaces, what kinds of events have they had, what kinds of speakers have they invited in recent years. And I think those are some of the things you can look for. I hope that that's helpful, but please don't hesitate to send an email. I think any of us are happy to talk further.
Any other responses to that question before we move on to another one? So Dr. Menendez-Acuña mentioned creating a world around you, right? A support system. Sometimes it's really not there. Can you all speak to that? And what is it that was absent from that you wish you had, that you didn't receive? And how creative did you have to be, or can you be?
Thank you for I mean, that's a very important question. Uh, and I don't know if there is an overall answer to that, but I will speak to my experience. As I shared in my presentation, I was fortunate enough to go to a PhD program that intellectually and almost personally met all of my needs. Like I went to Vanderbilt and I was lucky to study with Professor Segovia, and I found nothing but support, right? However, though, pursuing a PhD, it's, as many of you have, the panelists have shared, is a huge emotional investment. And it's particularly taxing when you, for me, there were two issues that were particularly difficult. The first one, that I didn't see jobs on the other side. So it's really hard to keep going when you feel that on the other side, there's not gonna be waiting for you and the skills you have to offer. So that was one thing. It's really easy to, or it's really easy to think of that like in abstract ways, but it's really hard when you are in your darkest moment of writing a dissertation and you feel that it's for nothing because you're not going to be able to find a job. So that was one issue. And the second issue for me was to that I didn't see many people like me on the other side either. So I define myself as queer, and although I'm very, I mean, like that's not my whole identity. I didn't see much queer scholarship, many queer scholars doing the kind of work that I was admiring, that I admire, that's what I was aspiring to. So those two things created kind of a crisis for me. And and when I refer to creating a world around you, what I meant again was creating a system of support around you that would help you to put those constraints aside and give you all the kinds of support that you need to keep going, even if your vocation at that point might be vanishing. So I'll share the personal story. I was about to quit, and John Rodriguez from HTI said, "You're not gonna quit because you're gonna regret it all of your life. What do you need? I'll give it to you." And the fact that someone at that point said that, but also convincingly, and she was gonna follow through, to me that made all the difference in the world. But I also realizing that that's the experience of many of us in academia. This is not just one particular experience. In this particular instance looks like that, but in other cases looks differently. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say here is that those are the kind of relationships and networks that are gonna get you through the finish line.
Anyone else like to respond to what you did not get and how creative you? Yes, Valerie. Yes.
Yeah, Valerie is fine. Dr. Bridgman, I'm a woman of a certain age, so I do want to acknowledge that. I want to suggest that that you might be creative in what that world means. Dr. Kalun and both Hidalgo pointed this out. Like my world was inhabited by people who were not in biblical studies. So there were people in theology, people in ethics, people in other traditions, other areas who actually helped me, and who helped me both in my PhD world, but also in my social world, So the womanist listserv, the womanist in gathering is not just biblical studies. You know, what I call at SBL the bar hopping, or at AAR the bar hopping night, where you're going to all these um, meetings where you get to see people who are not doing what you're doing, but help you see that it's possible to get through this. And of course, I was doing this in Baylor. And so here's what I want you to understand. None of my mentors were Black or Hispanic or Native or Asian. They were all white and mostly all white male, but they were actually great mentors. And so I want to suggest that there are some, while we're infiltrating, there are people already in the academy who see us and maybe who saw me, you know, at the time, and was willing to support and help me. I don't like the word ally, but I do like co-conspirators, or people who were willing to take risks beyond historical, beyond the tradition, and who saw the need to be subversive and saw the need to support me in that subversion. So I want to suggest that your support maybe doesn't look like what you think it does, and to not dismiss people because of what you presume about them, but maybe that you might want to do some recognizance and to see if they are support.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Bridgman. Let me pose a question to the panelists that has been answered indirectly in some of your comments and some of your responses, but that I think merits a direct response. One participant asks, how important is it to match with an advisor in the process of applying and in the process of selecting? Or can I just apply to the programs or institutions without establishing who on the faculty I want as my advisor? My impression of other fields like engineering or science is that it is more important to match with the right advisor than to get to the right institution. So are there panelists who'd like to speak directly to that very practical question about discerning?
I can start, and then other people can jump in. I think that it can very much depend on who you are, and it can shift over time. And here's what I will say. For me, in my experience, having the right advisor was more important than the right institution in terms of its name or, standing. It was much more important. I studied with, I had an advisor who is African-American, but also just someone who was broadly supportive of a diverse array of interdisciplinary research, and also someone who is broadly supportive of women scholars in a lot of critical ways. And I think that it made a huge difference, not to use huge too much, but it made a really big difference in my ability to complete the program, that I had an advisor who was overall quite supportive and has overall continued to be quite supportive of me. That said, I don't think that that is the only way to make it work. I know people who did not have that experience and instead just did a better job of building the world outside in a way that I think Dr. Bridgman was just talking about. It's both about building alliances with maybe some of the other faculty members there who might not be in biblical studies per se, but are there and supportive. But also in terms of having connections outside the field. So I had my advisor at my institution, but I didn't really have many other faculty there. So Jean-Pierre has written, I don't know, 400 letters of recommendation for me over the years. So it's not, you don't have to just rely on the faculty at the institution that you're at. So that's why I want to say that it doesn't have to just be a one or the other. But if there's someone that you have a really exciting intellectual connection with in terms of the kind of work that they can support, then that's probably a good thing to prioritize. But I also want to remind folks of something Louise said, which is that money also matters too. And I don't really want to undercut that. And so if money is a priority in terms of what you want to do, there are ways to build broader networks to support your work.
Can we talk about?
Can I say something really quick here?
Yes.
I completely agree with everything Professor Hidalgo said. I don't think I think that the advisor can make a great difference, but it's not the only way. But I do think, and I'm going to say it bluntly, choose a sane advisor. Because an insane advisor won't get you through and you will die in the process. Mm-hmm. How do you know that? Look for track records. How many people have graduated? How many people this advisor has graduated in the last 5-6 years? If you see a trend of people dropping out, that's a big red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. One removed herself from my dissertation committee, and that was a good thing. So some people have talked about the MDiv versus the MA in preparing to do a doctor, to enter into a doctoral program. Can you talk about the two differences? And can we connect to that, the questions about languages, right? Because this imposter syndrome starts early. And a lot of times there is a lot of sense of posturing in terms of everybody's struggling with languages. So can you address those two things, MDiv, MA, and languages?
Well, I saw that somebody asked me very early on what I thought I missed. So I will jump in here and I hope both Jennifer and Jeremy, all of you will speak to this, but I felt like APTS prepared me very well for the languages, but because the MDiv is pastorally related, at least it is at APTS where I got my MDiv, I didn't feel like I had enough underpinning for the ancient world. And if I were doing it again, I don't feel like I couldn't get that, but I feel like I would have had a better underpinning for the work I wanted to do in the PhD had I done a MA in the biblical world. I'm talking about Valerie. I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know the difference, but if I were doing it again and could think about it again, I would have spent a little bit more time before I jumped in the PhD. And then it took me longer to do my PhD because I got sick. And so I feel like I lost some steps. So I don't know that this is necessary, but I'm saying thinking back, if I were doing it again, I would have gotten another year of preparing myself before I went into my PhD. But other people may think differently. So, and I will say this about the languages. Yeah, I do think you need the languages. And we may say it's hegemony, and it probably is. It's a part of the world. And at the same time, it gives you a view into the biblical world that you can't have without the languages. It's impossible to have without the languages, I think. I think you can learn to ask different questions, which I think I've done as a womanist scholar. And as somebody who does diasporic studies or think about the biblical world differently, but you need the language to help you with that, I think.
And I'll just chime in here on the MA piece because I have an MA, but most PhD programs in biblical studies require an MDiv, right? An MDiv is a professional degree. It's one way of thinking about it. And an MA is a research degree. So I had to fill in some gaps, quite frankly, right? Going from an MA to getting to PhD programs, there are some gaps that I had to fill in. So it gave me the ability to kind of underscore what Dr. Bridgman was saying, was to really focus on biblical studies, which meant I missed out on all the pastoral theology, a lot of the systematic theology, and some of the church history. Those were some of the gaps that I had to fill in. Right before applying to PhD programs. So you could kind of do a side-by-side comparison, but one way I like to think about it is there's a research degree versus a kind of professional degree. And they offer you different things, but just understand that there may be some blanks, some holes, some gaps that you would need to fill in.
And just one quick thing that I would add is similarly to what's been mentioned before, is that that when you take these programs, if it's an MDiv or otherwise, you have to kind of take control of it if you can, if you have disciplinary flexibility. Similarly, what Dr. Hidalgo mentioned, that in some ways I was able to use my MDiv like to focus on biblical languages, and I was able to use electives to do biblical studies. So in that way, it became kind of like what Dr. Kaylin mentioned. It was almost like a MAR in Bible in the MDiv program, and with the extra year and with the summers in between, it was an opportunity to learn Hebrew or do some Coptic, or because I intentionally used my MDiv to position me to do a PhD. Now, did it mean I missed out on some interesting courses and some other types of work? Yeah, and did it mean I had to squeeze in some summer courses? Yes, but that was a part of kind of how to make it happen. Also, I'm speaking to like the MAR or to the extra language preparation. I did have a little of an advantage. I started taking some Greek as an undergraduate. So when I got to divinity school, I was able to jump into some exegesis classes. So that extra time to get the language facilities together is something to definitely consider in both constructing the program, that as you are choosing courses and as you are picking out how to make sure that you are effectively and efficiently navigating through it.
Yeah, so someone mentioned that they're at a school where they couldn't get languages. So if you're in an area where there's a consortium, I went to Catholic University. I was at Howard, went to Catholic, took intermediate Greek at Catholic University. If you're near a university, it may be worth it going to a university, even a 2-year school, and finding a language. Many schools are teaching biblical language, some of them at community colleges. Don't be afraid of them. I've seen people of color not pursue Bible because they're afraid of the language. Everybody struggles. I was in a program with a girl who had a long history of taking classical languages, and we struggled together. I had only had biblical Greek. We struggled together. So it is a struggle for everybody. It doesn't come, some of us are more adapt towards languages. I had never taken a language in high school and found out as an adult that I could do them. But I also put in a whole lot of work. Don't let the languages deter you if this is what you want. Find creative ways and spaces of getting the language requirements that you need. And I'll turn it over to Louise. I think Dr.
Hernandez Antonia, thank you.
My colleague here. I'm sorry.
What I'm gonna say here is heresy in biblical studies, but I believe it. As the state of affairs is now, yes, we need biblical languages. Like, I don't think anyone can go on the job market without Greek and Hebrew. In a world of dreaming, I don't think biblical languages are essential to biblical scholarship. There are very interesting work doing in American studies, Latino studies, gender studies around the Bible that is biblical without the languages. So yes, if we conceive of the epistemology of the field in terms of the historical criticism, for sure, we need the language. And I'm talking here someone who speaks like Greek, Hebrew, German, Portuguese, Spanish, Latin. So I have the languages covered. But I do think that as a guild, first we need to reflect on how the requirement of languages is limiting the access and the creativity of minorities to the field. And second, how it's impeding our capability or ability to imagine new futures for biblical studies.
Thank you. One further question in something of a different direction. One of the participants asked whether any of the panelists can speak about those who might feel a call toward pastoral ministry, as well as a life in the academy. And the bottom line question there is, can both be done well? So someone who wants to engage in pastoral ministry and do biblical studies, can both be done well?
I certainly hope so. I've done them both. So I hope I've done them both well. That's the answer I would give. I just got, somebody just posted on Facebook that I had supported them in both of those things. So I'm just going to say, yes, you can do them both well. But I also think you have to figure out what your no's are, as well as what your yeses are in those areas, because you're going to limit yourself in what the thing about going to Baylor is Baylor assumes that it was training someone who was going to teach in a small liberal college who had to teach across disciplines, ethics. So my degree is in biblical studies with a cognitive ethics. So I took ethics courses as well as Bible, both in, though I concentrated in Old Testament, I had to learn New Testament. And so assuming I would have to teach across those in a small liberal arts college, and assuming that I would be pastoring somewhere, which is the way most people who graduate from Baylor work. So I think you have to figure out what you're called to and then pick because Vanderbilt assumes that you're only going into the academy. So you have to think about that too, where you're being trained and what they expect from you.
Actually, as someone who went to Vanderbilt, I'm not sure that's fully accurate. Actually, Vanderbilt has a program in theology and practice. So you can be both a New Testament scholar and be trained in the practice, in traits that are more geared towards practicing ministry.
I'm glad to be corrected.
And I would hope that in line with Dr. Bridgman that I'm doing pastoring. I've done pastoring before and academic work, and I hope that I'm doing well at both. And one thing I'll just say is that just whoever asked that question, that I believe that they can fuel each other, because I believe that some of the questions that I'm able to ask in a congregation setting, if I didn't have the critical lens from the scholarship, I wouldn't feel comfortable asking in a congregation. But on the other side, some of the pastoral sensibilities actually affect an effective or useful and effective teaching, whether in the seminary or in the university setting. So I believe they can fuel into each other, but I believe that what she said was really right. You have to be able to control your schedule, know when to say no, and what things are important, and how to shape yourself into a scholar pastor or a scholar citizen, or however you are melding these identities together. It's really crucial that you're intentional about how you're doing it.
Yes, unfortunately, our time is up. It is now 2:31. If This has been great. We never have enough time. This will not be our last one. I believe our president and our committee would agree with that. And so we want to remind you that a recording of this session will be available by Monday or Tuesday. Please revisit the SBL, Society of Biblical Literature website. We have randomly chosen 20 participants to whom we will send, to whom some publishers will send free books. Any other announcements, my colleague, my co-moderator?
We're very glad that everyone participated. We're very sad that we were not able to address the questions that some of the questions that you raised simply because of the lack of time. Several of the panelists have indicated that they would be willing to chat with you and to address your questions offline. You will be able to find their contact information in the SBL directory, and we'll see what we can do to provide that contact information when the video of this afternoon's discussion is posted on the SBL website. I personally want to thank each of the panelists for the rich insights that they have provided this afternoon, for the challenges that they have set before us, for the questions that they leave in our minds, and for the example that they are offering in the work of biblical studies, doing the work of biblical studies differently. There are many threads that connect the work of our panelists, even though they are in different areas of biblical studies and are at different institutions. But the thread that, among the threads that they share, is a very, very deep commitment to the future of the discipline, looking at these challenging times in which we are living unflinchingly and not simply idealistically. Posing the challenges and recognizing the obstacles that there are, and at the same time providing us with strategies to wrestle with the obstacles and to move them out of the way. So I want to thank them. I want to thank Dr. Smith, my co-moderator, and once again the SBL and the FTE for their work in sponsoring and organizing this.
Thank you so much, and have a good afternoon.